All right, so we've been discovering WTCO, learning all about it, and now we're talking to Mary Cardona of the Wisconsin Community Media.
That's right.
Yes, and Mary's going to tell us a little bit about Wisconsin Community Media, how stations like WTCO are connected to other entities around the state, and all that. So Mary, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so now I understand you took the drive up from Madison today.
Yes.
Yeah, and so tell us a little bit, well, firstly, just a little bit about yourself. How did you ever get involved in community media?
Okay.
What drives your passion, all that stuff. And then we'll get into a little bit about what Wisconsin Community Media actually is.
Well, I'll try to make it short, okay? We don't want to spend the entire time on me, but I fell in love with the concept of public access when I was in college. And at that time, cable television, it was in the last century. And the exciting thing about cable was that it gave people in a community the opportunity to use television to speak to their community. And so it wasn't anything that would be funneled through the broadcast networks. It was something that the community had control of and could use to benefit their community, to talk about issues, to showcase their government, to showcase the arts. And to me, that whole idea of being able to control the media on a local level was exciting. It was really exciting. And I was a political science person, and I got a degree in political science, and ended up going back and got a master's in communications and focused on PEG television and on cable, and sort of the rest is history. I've worked in one way or the other in PEG ever since. I've run an access center, I've done consulting work, and now I work for Wisconsin Community Media, and it's a great organization.
Oh, I bet. Okay, well, tell us a little bit about Wisconsin Community Media, and for folks that might not know what PEG means.
Right.
Let us know about that.
Well, Trempealeau County is one of our premier stations. I want to just say that right now. The cool thing about Trempealeau is that the whole system is owned by the county. And so Trempealeau County, now WTCO, I've got to get used to saying that, is truly locally based from this studio all the way down to the lines that come into your home, and that kind of local control is really wonderful. Most of our member stations, and we now have 53 of them, rely on a cable company to carry their channel on the cable system. And so right now, about 90% of the state is served by charter, or spectrum as most people call them. And then we've got a number of other mom and pop type or smaller cable systems. And then there's AT&T in some spots, and et cetera. But they all have as their goal to showcase the local community. So a PEG station, PEG is short actually for Public Education and Government Access. So it really encompasses the three things that we do. We try to bring in the public to talk about what they want to talk about. We work with the schools and look at high school sports or school board meetings or the issues around education. And then of course we cover local government. So our 53 stations are all a little different. Some have a more emphasis on government, others more on education, and some are more community-based.
Interesting. So you alluded to this, at WTCO here in Trempealeau County. The media center, of course, is owned and operated by Trempealeau County, by the government entity, and of course, then our incredible staff that work here, our county employees. But I guess there's a lot of diversity around the state of how these centers are run. How in general are they run? Who are the people running them?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, it's mainly city departments. Way back when I first started, cable companies oftentimes would manage these PEG stations. And over time, the cable companies got out of the business. And in fact, in the last 6 years or so, Time Warner was sort of the last company in Wisconsin to get out of the business. They used to have a channel that served the Fox Valley and Green Bay. And they gave that to the city of Green Bay about 6 years ago to manage. They were the last ones. But otherwise, I would say, by and large, we're talking city departments. And so, of course, most of our members now have a focus on city government. Which is great. I mean, I think transparency in local government is one of the key things that we do, and we want people to know about what's going on in their communities from that kind of political issue standpoint. But we also think it's important to hear from residents as well, and it's gotten to be a little harder because the budgets, city budgets are getting tighter. We don't get as much support from the cable companies as we used to, especially since 2007. So the part of the PEG equation that focuses on the community and residents maybe coming in and even learning video production and doing their own shows, that part of the equation of PEG has kind of atrophied over the years.
Do you think with the pandemic, and I know we saw this here in Trempealeau County, do you think more folks maybe are seeing the value of these PEG stations like WTCO? I think about the scenario we had here where, of course, during the pandemic, meetings went virtual. There was a lot of fear of people gathering in groups, and of course we're still going through that. But here in Trempealeau County, if you still wanted to see what your county board was doing, you wanted to know what a county committee was doing, you wanted to know what was going on at many of the city and village meetings, things like that, you still had access to it, which is incredibly unique, especially in a place like a rural county, like Trempealeau County. Many rural counties don't have it. So do you think with the year that we've had, there's some folks seeing the value in these PEG stations in a way maybe some hadn't in the past? Because I sure feel like we have seen that here in Trempealeau County, both from our political actors and citizens that, again, would have had no access to these decision-making activities if it hadn't been for WTCO.
Right. I think so. And I'm very proud of all of our stations that really stepped up to the plate. And I think local governments became much more aware of what all goes into creating a good production and the technical aspects of these things. It's very involved. And when you say, okay, start, don't just cover 3 meetings a month, now cover 15, it was a Herculean effort on the part of a lot of these staffs to do that. And I've seen many cities since add to their staffs, expand hours, provide more equipment to these to the effort because they saw how important it was. And it's not only it was not only a government transparency issue, but it was a safety issue. It was a public safety issue, and to make sure that people could continue to run their governments and yet not get sick, and so it was a pretty fundamental service that I think our PEG stations offered their communities, and I'm really, really proud of them.
Yeah. So our PEG stations now, is this a uniquely Wisconsin concept? Do we have them all over the country? Are with Wisconsin Community Media, are there organizations like that in all the states? How does all that work?
Yeah, PEG is national. Each state regulates PEG in a slightly different way. We're all governed by a federal law, but in some states, control over these kinds of stations or the statute governing them or the ordinances governing them is on the local level, which is what Wisconsin had until 2007. And then there are a handful of states, maybe a dozen or so, that in 2007-ish, in that period, transitioned to a state-level franchise. And those states that transition to a state-level franchise tend to be less supportive of community media than those who stayed with it on the local level, primarily because of stronger enforcement on the local level and an insistence by locals that the cable companies serve community needs. And what happened when you moved it to a state level and just said that these are the rules, this is how you're going to operate, what happened in a lot of states is that it lost that connection to community and what communities needed, and they also lost enforcement powers to make sure that companies were abiding by the statute or their franchise agreements. So anyway, so it varies. For example, in the Northeast, there are states that dedicate all of their franchise fees to PEG. Whereas in Wisconsin, we get a franchise fee, but the city gets to determine how that franchise fee is spent.
Now, for those that might not understand what the franchise fee is, explain that just a little bit.
So, so when a company comes into a city, they pay a franchise fee to the city to use their easements to run their wires either underground or overground, and that's called a franchise fee. So it's basically a fee for using the right-of-ways in the city, or the rights-of-way in the city. In Wisconsin, when we went to a state-level law, cities retain those franchise fees. They call them video service provider fees now in Wisconsin. They retain them, and those fees, as always, can be used for anything the city wants to spend them on, or they can spend them on PEG. It can be either. But the idea is they're paying the public for the use of their rights of way.
I see. So you alluded to the year 2007. You've touched a little bit on some of the challenges facing community media. But I guess what are the threats to community media here in Wisconsin? What has changed over time, and where do you see the real challenges going forward?
Well, I think the big threat in Wisconsin is that the law that was passed in 2007 is very weak. And cable companies, which include telephone companies that also offer cable service like AT&T, cable companies are barely regulated, and the enforcement powers of the state are very light. So recently, we had a situation where we had several PEG channels go down. And this was because the cable company, particularly Charter Spectrum, hasn't been upgrading the equipment used for PEG in a very, very long time. And it seems as though recently they've come to the realization that they have to do it, otherwise these channels are going to go off the air, and they do have a duty to transmit these PEG channels. So they're starting to change the way they're transmitting them, but apparently they're not quite ready to roll that out. So when Rice Lake and Oshkosh and Green Bay all went down because their old transmission equipment broke, they at first told these cities that it would be 5 or 6 months before they would get their channels back up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we just went wild. We started contacting legislators and talked to city officials, and we've talked to state agencies, and basically said, this is not okay. And the pressure that we put on Spectrum really worked, and what they did was they happened to find either little fixes or substitute equipment to replace this transmission equipment with. But the equipment is so old that you can't buy it.
Sure.
It's so old, you have to see if you can dig out an old secondhand one somewhere that someone isn't using, and it's in their closet.
Yeah.
Because the way they transmit PEG channels right now is so antiquated, only old equipment will suffice. And that's why they wanted to leave these channels off the air for 5 or 6 months, because they need apparently that much time to upgrade how they're transmitting the channels.
Wow. So, I know, and one of the reasons why we're doing this Discover Trempealeau County on WTCO and on Wisconsin Community Media, it's October 20th is Community Media Day.
Right.
And I think a lot of folks, especially folks that enjoy this program and all the programs on WTCO and the other PEG channels throughout the state, they're folks that probably see the value in it and they want to support community media. So, Mary, talk to us a little bit about Community Media Day, and then also how folks can let their voices be heard and show their support for community media. Whether it's on the local or the state or even the national level.
Well, Community Media Day is a national day that is celebrated that to promote the idea that local media is important. And we celebrate not only cable PEG channels, but also low-power FM radio, which is also another way that we get local media. We do a variety of things. We'll have programs. We do Facebook posts and Instagram posts and things like that to celebrate Community Media Day. But it's just another way to kind of highlight the fact that there are these community media stations out there. If people want to support their community media stations, I think there's a number of things they could do. They could let their legislators know that these channels are important, that they watch what's on them. They can tell them, I love watching government meetings on cable television. I mean, there are a number of ways. These media centers don't just use cable. They will stream on Facebook. Mm-hmm. They will use the web. They do video on demand. They might be on Apple TV. But we find that there's a large sector of our audience that subscribe to cable, and they want to see this programming on cable, and they want to see it in HD. Mm-hmm. You know, right now, even though Charter is upgrading their transmission scenario for PEG, they're still not planning to carry us in HD. And that's just a crime. I mean, WTCO is in HD and has been for a long time. Most people watch TV in HD. There are people with 4K sets, and there's 4K, programming. So we're really stuck in the last century here with SD. And so one of the things, if you're asking what can people do, you could say, hey, I like watching my cable television. I like watching my local programming on cable TV, and I want to see it in HD. Mm-hmm. That would be a great help to us, because that is what we're really pushing for right now on the state level, as well as some language that will hopefully make sure that the equipment that we are given to use to transmit, that it's solid equipment, that it's good equipment, that if it does break down, that it's fixed quickly. I mean, we don't want to face another situation where our stations are off for 5 or 6 months. Mm-hmm. So between the equipment and then HD, though, that's what we're really pushing. So if you want to help, call your legislator and say, cable, local cable TV and HD. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going for.
Yeah, that'd be great. Like you said, WTCO, we really are lucky to have a great partnership with TCC and the county, and it'd be great to see that for more of the PEG channels around the state. Right. Well, you sort of just talked about this, but in our final minutes together, what do you see the future of PEG channels, of Wisconsin community media? What do you see coming up in the future? How do you think these incredible stations and resources will continue to adapt over the years to come? Because certainly they've adapted from when they first started. I think WTCO is I think we just had our 40th anniversary not so long ago, and of course it's evolved in many ways. So where do you see community media going in the years ahead?
Well, as I said, we've already adapted quite a bit. So we call them PEG stations, but I've been calling them PEG stations, but really we've evolved to call them media centers, because we not only carry programming on cable television systems, but we also are using the web with video on demand. We also are on Hulu or Apple TV so we do distribute in a lot of different ways already. So that's one change that has happened over the last decade, I would say. But the other thing is we're very dependent on cities for funding. And that is a concern, because cities they have a tough row to hoe with funding, and it's tough. And so what we've just, we're very excited to announce that the WCM has formed a new nonprofit called the WCM Program Fund. And what the Program Fund is going to be doing is leveraging all of the resources we have in these PEG media centers and combine that those facilities with the production technicians that we have, with nonprofit organizations, with individuals, and with funders. And what we're trying to do is build up our capacity to produce programs about communities and about community issues. Maybe programs that cities have tended to leave behind because they just don't have the time to do those sorts of shows, especially when you're doing 20 government meetings a month now. You may not have the time to really go out and do those community stories. So what we're looking for the fund to do is to find topics, find issues that have more of a regional scope, that might appeal to many cities, and so that many of our media centers would want to play this programming because it's of interest to them. Like, it could be about the Central Sands area and the water conditions there. It could be about economic development in the Fox Valley region. It could be just a range of issues that not really necessarily state level, because we have something called WSI for that, but we're looking at regional kinds of things that people would want to hear about, and then find funders and people to get involved in producing those programs.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So Mary, if folks want to learn more about Wisconsin Community Media, if they want to learn more about how they can help, or more about the WCM program fund, all of those things, what's the best way to learn more? I
think just go to our website and just put in Wisconsin Community Media, and you'll be at our website, and it's chock full of a lot of stuff. I probably need to pare down.
And you guys are on social media as well, you said?
Oh yes, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Mary, thank you so much for taking the drive up to Madison to be with us today. Again, it's Mary Cardona from Wisconsin Community Media, and we just really appreciate learning more about just how these stations are connected together, and how they share a goal that isn't just for Trempealeau County and our community, but they're serving really a role that is both a state and a national priority. And hopefully this will inspire some folks to learn more and support the stations any way they can.
Right, and I should really just say one more thing, and maybe I didn't emphasize this enough, but many of these media centers would love to have people come in and say, I want to help. And if you want to learn more about television production, they have internships. We're looking for high school students, college students. It's a fabulous way to learn about the industry and television production if you're interested.
That's great. Well, and I should add too, that's exactly how I got involved. Back in high school, I got involved in producing a show here it was TCC TV then, WTCO now, and the rest is history. So it really is, and it's incredible the programming that the volunteers do make. And they know the issues in the community, and often it really doesn't matter what you're interested in. If you're willing to put some time into it, you can make a show probably for one of these channels.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of my favorites from your station is History Files.
Yes, oh, that's a fun one.
They are fabulous.
Yes, they do a great job. Well, Mary, again, thanks again. We just really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Thank you.